get started. I mean, we talked about this a little bit this morning, Philippe, and I think you were listening to that conversation. But in terms of turning that master plan that lays the groundwork, as we've heard over and over again, to transform ATM, make transport more efficient, resilient, and sustainable, what do you see now as the crucial challenges we need to address if we are to ensure a successful rollout?
Well, the ATM Master Plan, I think, is a fantastic achievement. And again, we've managed to bring together the whole ecosystem to have a common vision about the future. Of course, a plan is just a plan. And what really matters is to roll up our sleeves and to implement it. And I have to say that I've been really encouraged by the spirit that has been on this podium this morning and outside, of course, in the exhibition hall of a can-do attitude and even an ambition to go faster and further than what the ATM Master Plan even puts there. Particularly this coming together of a coalition of the willing, of a number of ANSPs, systems manufacturers, who are then calling on the support of regulators, EASA, standardization, etc., to create an environment that will accelerate the technological change. I think is really encouraging. This wish to move towards the new service delivery model is really critical, and it's something I have not heard in the past. And I think it's really thanks to the fact we have a new group of leaders in many of those critical players who have the wish to make it happen. Not the wish to be defensive and say, leave me alone, but the wish to move forward together. And this is really, for me, a difference with what we heard in the past. And I dare to say that perhaps the SESAR community and all the work that has been put into that over the years has helped to create this common feeling of purpose.
We'll come back on each of your specific areas of responsibility and how you see it contributing. But to stay with that broad question, if I might, to start with, and Jesper, from your perspective, the key challenges now to deliver, he said, the will is there, we have the coalition of the willing, we have the wish to make it happen. What are the challenges we need to address?
Well, as we see it from the other side is that, of course, we are a safety agency, the guardians of safety. But on the other hand, and that's equally important, we also see ourselves as a facilitator for the overall progress in the ATM field. When the balls are rolling to us in terms of rulemaking and certification and approvals, we would like to work with stakeholders on prioritization. What is most important? Because there are a lot of things being important, and we can be asked all kinds of things from various stakeholders. So prioritization, that's a key word in my mind, and we are not to decide what to start with. Actually, we like to be the facilitator of industry, of the overall plan, of where to start. So we are, to a large extent, in your hands in terms of prioritization.
Thank you very much, and we'll come back on certification was raised in our last panel, so I would like to come back on that. Standardization also raised a lot in our last panel. We'll come to the specifics of that, but sticking for the moment, if we might, Michael, with our bigger picture in terms of the challenge ahead to implement the master plan, what would you highlight as most important?
All right, I think all important ingredients for successful delivery have been mentioned already today. So we discussed standardization correctly just before. We discussed the platform for collaboration so that the interested and willing partners have a neutral place to exchange, to discuss, and to drive innovation, but also deployment forward. We have discussed the need for central coordination, so that really organizations can meet and develop the innovations and further on also synchronize their deployments. And the integration of new application types, new technologies, so emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, where we know that there is a need for high data volumes in order to really have artificial intelligence working as expected. And then linking a bit back to EASA and also to the regulatory framework. So we need the regulatory framework supporting innovation, yeah, but also supported by standards. And this regulatory framework should be as flexible as possible and as stringent as needed. Yeah, so to not hinder innovation, but to support innovation.
Thank you very much indeed. Maria Grazia, we've talked a lot about deployment. Obviously, that concern now to take those nearly 140 solutions that we have and deploy them and be ready to deploy the new ones. How do you see the challenge ahead in terms of implementing the plan?
Yeah, thank you, Jackie, and good afternoon, everybody. Indeed, deployment is already happening because we need to look also what we have in the pipe right now. But with regard to the ATM master plan, the new ATM master plan, I think what we need to take care of is to accelerate the market uptake. So looking at the lessons learned from the past, we need to find a way to accelerate the market uptake and also to provide the right incentives to deploy. Because these incentives could be, we discussed also before, the previous speaker, could be the funding, could be a renewed performance scheme, could be just demonstrate how much there are performance benefits from the implementation of all these, if we look at the SESAR deployment objectives specifically. So I think these are the main points, and of course, to ensure the buy-in from everybody. That has to be not only on the development side, but has to continue up to the deployment side. Because when it comes to deployment, things becomes a bit more complex because they have to be deployed all over Europe by many operational stakeholders, and so we need to ensure that the buy-in remains also in the final step.
Thank you. And talking of buy-in, Mark, one thing we haven't talked about so much, we began to talk about the issue of human capital towards the end, but buy-in from the workforce, the ATM workforce, will be absolutely crucial. We'll come to that as a specific in a moment, but in broad terms, how do you see the challenge ahead if we are to deliver on the master plan?
So if I may use an image from meteorology, we're again, every 20 years, we're in a perfect storm situation, and this summer will be a perfect storm situation with a higher demand than the offer and things like this. And if you go out in a perfect storm situation with your boat, you need a life raft. You need something which gives you a handrail or whatever you can actually secure some sort of that you can survive in case something goes wrong. The SESAR joint undertaking, the SESAR ATM master plans for us have always been this handrail, okay, in the sense, and that should continue. So we are really convinced that the way to bring the people together, like conferences like this, is very important, and also to outline where we could go to when it comes to research. The reality, however, is that currently, because of our other elements of Single European Sky, like the performance scheme, we have issues finding and attracting investors, meaning that on the ground you need approximately now every year to invest 150 million euros to train new controllers, to cope with the traffic increase, to cope with the demography of the current workforce. Meaning that 150 million you can't invest in other things. So you need to attract investors from outside, which would be willing to team up, to make partnership, to come to a service-oriented architecture or a cloud-based architecture. So this is the thing. So yes, we are convinced it's the right way forward, but we should not forget that there's a reality out there which is sometimes, from a regulatory point of view, producing things which are not necessarily acting like a handrail. So typically, it has been discussed this morning, but the more you focus on performance, the more you increase the fragmentation of the deployment of the researched solutions. So that's really a danger, and that can only be addressed at the community level.
And just picking up on that, how do we address it?
By being pragmatic, in the sense that, yes, we have on one side we have a regulatory environment, which is what it is, but on the other side we also need most probably to ask the states, in the current situation, are we really a critical infrastructure? Or how far are we part of a critical infrastructure? National defense has just been mentioned before. And if we are part of the critical infrastructure, then the network, cloud-based or service-oriented architecture will have to be dealt with in a different way than if we are not, in the sense that if we can open up to big providers of cloud solutions. So I'd love to see one of the life rafts in the perfect storm to have a SESAR ATM cloud. One. And it has been discussed before that applications can be downloaded from various things. That should be our aim.
Thank you very much. I want to take each of your areas of responsibility in turn now. And Philip, coming back on this point Michael made when he said we need the regulatory framework to support innovation. He also talked about standardisation, which I'll come back to with you in a moment. But in terms of getting that balance, I think you put it as flexible as possible and as stringent as possible. Do you think we have that right? Do we have the right framework to attract that investment and really accelerate progress now?
Well, we have the new SES regulation. SES 2+ is the constitution of the single sky, if you like. It is what it is. It's not as good as we wanted, but there are some very important achievements, including the fact that SESAR as a project is now anchored in that regulation. And so therefore it's with us to stay as a collaborative environment where we can make this modernization happen. Because what is, I think, peculiar to the ATM sector is that there are so many actors who need to work together in order to move things forward, that no single player is capable of making that shift towards modernization. And more even we see that also the resources and the scale that is needed for things like AI are just beyond the abilities of any individual player. So having a common approach like we have in SESAR is absolutely necessary also for the future. When it comes to regulation, we really indeed have to find the right balance between a performance-based approach and a prescriptive approach. You need to have a level of standardization, synchronization, and I heard people asking for a next common project, for example, which is actually, the common project is a bit unusual for us to put in a law obligation to make certain technological steps. But there is even a demand for that, and probably in this sector a need for, in order to have that collective action. What we shouldn't do is prescribe the detailed technologies. We should prescribe the enablers, the functionalities, and enforce that, make sure that everybody is acting on that, but not go into too much detail. We've learned our lesson from the famous data link, VDL Mode 2, that is, I'm told, a 20 or 30-year-old technology, which we are still struggling to implement. And we know now that the deadline for rollout in the whole European airspace was 2018. It will be fully rolled out in 2028. That's not, clearly something's wrong here. So we need to find another way of working, stimulate deployment in a different way. And this, my last point would be to say deployment, and it was mentioned several times also by the political leaders this morning, is really the focus going forward politically. If we want to be plugged into the political priorities of the day and make a claim for attention and possibly money, we need to be plugged into those priorities, which is about competitiveness. We have to see also this sector as an industrial sector, a service sector where we are leaders in the world, top level. We can export even our products. And with that angle, I think we can make a claim for political attention and potentially also budget.
Which links to the conversation I had this morning about Destination 2050, when I was asking about, you know, to what extent issues like ATM and the modernisation of ATM are a competitiveness issue, and very much endorsed by our industry speakers there. Let me come to EASA and the role of EASA. We had a plea in the last panel for a supportive regulatory environment to certify innovations. We also had a question from the audience about safety and whether people saw a challenge to safety from the new service delivery model. In fact, the answer came clearly from the panel, no. It's actually Alan Seba talked about that. But your sense of where we need to go with this now and concerns over those issues.
Let me build a bit more on what Philip was saying, that yes, we need to balance our regulation. We have seen also in other domains, in the drones and eVTOLs and so, a large call for quite detailed regulations. Perhaps some stakeholders don't want so detailed regulations than others want it. And then at the end of the day, we have seen several examples that we have ended up in a quite detailed body of regulation. Now, this has one upside, and that it provides certainty. That's a good thing. So now you can see the rules. It's like this. We go this way. But there is also a backside of that coin. It's that it creates rigidity, and it takes time. So back to what was said before, as stringent as needed and as flexible as possible. Yes, we can endorse that. We will, in fact, try to do the minimum of what is required. We believe that the current regulatory framework, actually you can go quite far with that, with some flexible approach, if I can say it this way. There will be here and there some showstoppers. Of course, we will address them. But when we are hearing repetitive calls for, could you specify a bit more here? Could you add a bit more there? We will perhaps politely push more back and say, perhaps this is a job for stakeholders, for industry, together with ANSPs and others, and go to EUROK and other standardization bodies to deal with that. There we can do some referencing in our rule-making body to these standards, but it is much easier to amend them over time than putting it into the European rule-making body.
Okay, and talking about standardization and timeliness, one crucial issue seems to be when we talk about the process for preparing the standards needed for the new innovations and whether the timelines are aligned between what is in the master plan and the work that you are doing. How do you see that challenge, Michael? And what's your plan for going forward with that and aligning? Sorry, Michael. Yeah, both of you, but let's get a thought from Michael and you can react.
Let's take a look back to when the joint endeavor with SESAR started, so some 15 years ago, where we had a beautiful first version of the ATM master plan, and all the experts started to work in many projects. At this point in time, the topic of standardization was not seen as so important as we see it today. Yeah, so we did the first deployment program with CP1. We have seen then also from EUROK perspective, there's something needed in addition than the 137 solutions we have today. So what has been done in scope of SESAR 3 was the integration of EUROK right on the governance level. So with this integration of EUROK, we work on the alignment of the technical work program of EUROK, but also EUROK and the experts of EUROK are involved in several of the currently running SESAR projects. By that, we hope to ensure that the needed standards can be developed in time. Development in time means being not too late, but also being not too early. So when working in a standard developing body, we have seen sometimes that there are great ideas from experts, from organizations. So as you know, EuroK is a member-based organization, yeah. Or member-driven organization. So ideas are brought to EuroK. Please help us developing a standard further. And then the standard has been started, but due to lack of interest, maturity of the solution at the end, the standard has not been picked up and has not been implemented in time. Yeah. So with our integration now in the SESAR environment, yeah. So I hope at least that we have a solid technical work program supporting the deployment.
Thank you. Did you want to, yes, but before I come to Maria Grazia, did you want to add anything there?
Well, about the timeliness,
Yeah.
we have spoken a lot today about the need for collaboration, all stakeholders. I think everybody agrees with that. It's hard to disagree. Well, we have taken one further step to actually make a partnership, agreed with SESAR to make a joint roadmap. We are not the specialists in innovation. We believe that SESAR and the stakeholders are the specialists, but to kind of filter to us what is then needed to make this plan work. So we will team up, we will make a joint roadmap, we will form a joint secretariat even to make this happen. So that's a very concrete manifestation of the collaboration we intend to do.
Thank you. Perhaps come back on that a bit later. Maria Grazia, from your perspective, and in terms of, we've talked a lot about deployment today because inevitably we are celebrating the successes of SESAR so far and then looking to the future and where we go from here. But now, in terms of what we need to do on deployment to implement the master plan, what for you are going to be the key next steps?
I think the first thing to do is, and this we do thanks to our setup, that is a partnership model, to gain the buy-in of stakeholders to go into the next steps. Then the ATM master plan for the first time is identified 10 SESAR deployment objectives. So there is already a sort of prioritization of deployment that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. But among this list of 10, I still believe that we need to identify what has to go first to facilitate the investments of the stakeholders, because at the end it's about investments, all this. And we need to put in place the right framework to support the investments. And I said before, could be through funding, could be as the performance scheme where we do not penalize the technological investments, and there could be also to find a way to support the early movers, for example. No? So because at the end, from the lessons learned that we have, is all about how we incentivize the next steps. And funding worked very well with the Common Project 1, but especially with the airlines, it was a combination of funding with the results in terms of performance. So we were able to demonstrate that the cost-benefit ratio from the implementation was really high. And so it was convenient to invest in SESAR. And that was the way we gained attention from everybody.
Thank you. Mark, you talked about, and talking here about resources and about funding, you talked about the resources needed for training, and indeed I saw a question from someone in our earlier panel about the tension potentially between what we need now and the funding we need now to ensure we have the workforce we need and that preparation for the future and taking up these new technologies. How do you see that, and more broadly in terms of the buy-in of the workforce for this modernization? Does it exist? And if it doesn't yet exist fully, what's holding it back?
A difficult question in the sense that if we look at the performance, so we create delays last summer, which costs around 3 billion euros, okay? They are created by a bottleneck somewhere. This bottleneck if you want to train the people, you need to invest 1 billion. So I mentioned that before, it's about 150 million which have to be invested and which come out of the same investment budget. So that is one perspective on the thing. So give us more people. Well, what do you do then with the more people? I mean, you can't continue to split the sector in smaller and smaller parts. That doesn't make sense, okay? So here technology needs to come in. Network-centric solutions need to come in. So we need to move towards a digitalization of the network functions. And then in parallel, and that's then also what I mentioned before, we need to attract investors beyond EU funds, which are willing to invest into bringing everybody at least to the best in class, because there is still a potential for 20 to 30% in the current existing system to bring them to a level of best in class. But for that you need money, and for that you need to be allowed to spend this money into that. And the controllers as such, the controllers, they will buy in if you give them an easier life with better tools, more intelligent tools, assisting tools. They will buy in, that's for sure. And I think that's also where we currently, at least for our members, that's the challenge, is that we would like to see the technology to hit the ground much quicker than research, deployment, and what is done. And some of us are very frustrated when they see what their colleagues already have in a daily use. So there is a delta, and that's a little bit the challenge, where we then say nothing is really coming, although that's not true. The things are coming, but in an incremental way.
Thank you. The last piece of this jigsaw puzzle, and it links to that issue of resource and investment in training, is overall EU spending in this area, EU funding. We've touched on already today the multi-annual financial framework, which is what we like to call the EU budget here in Brussels, and the conversations about it already beginning now. Philip, how do you see that conversation and making sure that we have the research resources focused on those development priorities that have been outlined in SESAR?
Yes, Jackie, as you're saying, discussion has started on the future EU budget. The Commission will make a proposal this summer for the next 7-year budget, which starts only in 28, but 28 is around the corner. Of course, this proposal that will come this summer, it will be rather high level. It will probably not say very much about SESAR. But nevertheless, there is something I wanted to draw attention to, which is that a consultation has been launched by the Commission, actually a few days ago, to the European citizen and organizations to share views about what should be in the future EU budget. So I invite everybody to have a look at this on the internet and offer your views on this. Now, what is definitely going to be very difficult is to have a lot more budget. We know that budgets are constrained across Europe. There are a lot of new priorities, not to mention defense, that will also be reflected in the future EU budget, no doubt. So to promise now a lot more money, or even to promise money at all, is not possible. We have to, and you have to come with a case, with a project, with something that is worth investing in from the perspective of the priorities of the future: competitiveness, resilience, defense, etc. So that's the first thing. But I would say SESAR and ATM modernization is not dependent on public money, and should not be dependent on public money. It's a sector that is basically self-financing. Aviation is self-financing. What we can do with public money is serve as a catalyst on the one hand to push developments in a certain direction, and on the other hand we can help we can help first movers or those with a negative business case to make the step of this collective change, even though they have no short-term benefit or even no benefit at all. So that is where our scarce funds could be going, but I think we need to think about SESAR also as something in itself, not a vehicle for funding, but as a project that has its own merits in itself.
Thank you. I don't know whether anybody, before we move on, wants to react, Mika.
Yeah, I think funding is really a key element, and I really buy into first movers advantage or incentivizing. One additional element I'd like to mention here is the kind of earmarked budget for our ATM environment. So from what we have seen in some other cases is that we are fighting for the same budget as Europe's rail, for example, the same budget as other transport domains. So this earmarking, I think, would help to create insurance, to create confidence that there is a future, that it is worthwhile to start investing now, and also in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, there is sufficient investment from public money available in order.
So we're not just really talking about 2028 onwards, we're talking about now, because if you don't have the confidence that it will exist 2028 onwards, right now you begin to lose investment. Did you want to, Maria Grazia?
Yeah, no, I think, yes, of course, to earmark the money for the ATM would be much better, but I have to say that from the last 2 years of experience where this money was not clearly earmarked, was really multimodal competition, so ATM managed anyhow to have a big support in terms of funding. And also to come back to what was said before, so what to fund. At the end, we stimulated the deployment thanks to the funding, but also beyond, because only a part of implementation is ongoing thanks to funding, and is less than half of what is happening of the Common Project 1, for example. The rest is ongoing without funding. And also we stimulate the interest of the airlines, because thanks to a coordination body, they see that there is we can move together. So the ground and the airborne side are moving together. And so sometimes they, the majority of time, they invest without receiving any funding. And I think it's a good way forward. And also they invest, for example, in the airlines for initial trajectory-based operation. They saw the added value of this implementation in terms of improved capacity, improved CO2 reduction of emissions, that they not only invest in forward fit, but they also invest in retrofit, no? Because we discussed before this topic, but that's why it's a combination of everything. I agree with Philippe that SESAR has an added value per se, because it's a strong partnership model, is a strong model that was able to position itself at global level, if we want to talk about competitiveness. But indeed, there are a lot of investments in front of us, and NSPs, airlines, airports need support. We're asking a lot, and we need to find a way to support them.
Thank you. I want to come back because there's a couple of questions from the audience on the regulatory side. Someone asking, are the management systems of the ATM industry at a mature enough stage for regulation to be less prescriptive, particularly in view, for example, of emerging cyber threats? And someone else says, a regulation that incentivizes, does it always need to come on top, or can we also get a better framework by thinking about dialing back on some regulation? So one saying goes to your point about prescriptiveness and flexibility, but the other also saying maybe some of it we could dial back. Philippe first, and then I think you probably both want to react.
Well, we're actually in the process of identifying regulations that can be dialed back, unnecessary reporting, and the Commission will make several proposals this year in this sense. I know also in EASA there is a project on, not specifically in ATM, but in general, to look at regulations to see if we can make things simpler to comply with, without, of course, giving up on safety and interoperability, which are two essential elements. But just to come back to the service delivery model, I don't think we need, I think you said it, we don't need any new rules or remove any rules for this to be put in place. It's a question of people coming together and making that step, making budgets available in the ANSPs. As you were saying very rightly, Mark, there needs to be the space to finance that investments in modernization. For some time, you may have old systems and new systems coexisting, but all this is possible, even under the performance scheme, which sometimes is blamed for hampering innovation. It's not at all the case. We've seen in the past that ANSPs have tended to underinvest compared to the plans that have been approved. And definitely there is a conversation to be had. Those who want to put in place modern data-based, cloud-based, interoperable systems, AI technologies as well, a conversation to be had. Yes, this will cost more in the short run, but in the longer run we will save money, we will save on hiring new ADCOs, which anyway are in short supply. We will make their job more interesting with automation. And so there is space to realize that, and the rules, I don't think they stand in the way of doing this.
And somebody just posed the somewhat philosophical question, how much regulation is too much regulation? Quick responses on this. I'd like to come back to the human at the heart of all this at the moment.
That corresponds to what we hear from stakeholders. They say to us, EASA, you have too many rules, but not enough.
Michael, did you want to add something?
I like Philip's statement, so I'm sharing that view. I think for the new service delivery model, we have rules in place which can be used also in the new way we are going to make air traffic services. Some of the rules might have to be sharpened, and as you said before, they will have to run through continuous update processes with rule-making tasks for making them more sharp to be adapted to our environment.
Mark, sorry, Maria Grazzi, did you want to
just a few words, because it's about the common project, because at the end it's a regulation, and from the experience that I have, it was helpful to have that kind of regulation in place, because it's driving through functionalities, not specifically through technologies, and this is the big advantage, to have this kind of flexibility. And so the combination of having this overarching regulation and then a deployment program developed by us that is really guiding a stepwise approach on how things must be done and when must be done, I think was the right combination of technology and willing of industry to invest. So I think that was a framework that worked, with the coordinator, of course, guiding the implementation.
Mark, I don't know whether you want to react on this conversation, or can I move us on to an issue which you talked about. Air traffic controllers will embrace this if they see the benefits of it. But there is always this debate about, automation as a complement, as a support to help them do their jobs, but some concern still about it as a replacement for their jobs. Do you think that is a debate that is ongoing and still needs to be addressed? Or is it now more a question of, yes, we see the complementarity, we're just frustrated because we can't get our hands on the things that could make our work easier and make our working lives better? Is there still a tension between them, or is it more get on with it?
I think it's expectation management. You can never exclude the social fear of new things. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, are we talking about the new steam machine with plenty of possibilities, or are we talking about the Leviathan, so everything will disappear, okay? So there is a lot of philosophical elements into that. But to come back again is the controller needs assistance to do the job, because with the forecasted traffic increase, we're simply not capable as humans to carry out the traffic. In the organizational forms we have nowadays, we cannot. And in order to have, because we were always, as I said, critical of new technology, because when it was signed and what was delivered, there was a delta in between, and therefore, at least at IFATCA, we have decided we need to take the bull by the horns, and we have developed a policy on what could be a future system where automation, higher degrees of automation, but also new technologies as machine learning, as artificial intelligence, can assist the human in doing the job. For that, we have also been able, and I mean, this is fabulous. I'm talking just as me, this is fabulous. We have been able to join consortia who are now looking into the use of AI to support the human, which is fabulous. Where in the world can you provide a political, a research system where you can associate the end user at the design phase? This is how it should be. Okay, so that is very, for me personally, a success. Now, on a longer run, I think I'm repeating myself, we cannot continue to use the same methodology of making the airspace smaller, focusing on our fragmented environment, use multiple translators from one system to the others, etc., etc. So we need to break that up in a way or another, and that is the challenge. So nowadays, the only way, again, personally, what I see, we need to be able to produce a digital layer which is put over all the current system, the legacy system, and then start to work from that. And maybe we have to ask ourselves, but that's maybe then for the next ATM master plan, should we not start to apply supply chain logics? We are talking about a logistics puzzle, if you want, but we are still not embracing some of the technology or the concepts which are around the world when it comes to logistical issues since over 30 years.
And thank you. I'm touching there, I think, on a number of issues that we may come back to when we look at the future of ATM research and innovation and where we need to focus. I just wanted to touch on one more issue before I ask each of you for your key next step. And it's an issue that came up this morning about monitoring and milestones. So when you talk about a successful rollout, somebody said earlier, well, we need to agree on what we mean by success, but then also we need to be measuring, monitoring. 2045 is a long way away. What are the interim steps? What are the milestones? Any thoughts on that? Maria?
Yeah, no, I think it's very, very important because, and we need to do a monitoring. We do it for the deployment, for example, but it's not just a collection of data. So the monitor means also to identify and the risk, the implementation in my case. So it's to identify what are the problems, to identify the mitigations, to support the stakeholders in de-risking the implementation, and as far as possible, accelerate the implementation. Of course, if we look at the entire value chain, it would be good to have this kind of monitoring also into the development part. So if we identify 10 SDOs, we need to identify and put some milestones to check how they are progressing towards the implementation, because there are important milestones that must be checked up to TRL 6 and after TRL 6 before the implementation can start, and then of course also with the implementation.
Mikhail, you want to say something, Mark, as well?
Yeah, so implementation of a plan without monitoring is no implementation. Yeah. So when implementing, whether it's our ATM master plan or the SESAR work program or the SESAR deployment plan, it is for me, for us at least, clear that all the agreed milestones will have to be looked at, and it has to be checked on whether we are there or not. If not, of course, then we need to find some mitigation measures. Monitoring, but also means, especially for standardization, to identify right in time as early as possible if there are some gaps in standardization. Yeah, so we heard this morning that not everything needs to be standardized, and I'm fully agreeing to that. But when we start with a SESAR project, a SESAR program, we identify standardization needs. We are working on the standardization documents, which says this or that is needed by then, and if it's not there, then we need to act.
Start working now.
But if we do not identify it right in the beginning that there has to be a standard in time, then there has to be a certain moment during execution of the plan to identify, oh, we missed something. Let's work on it.
Thank you. Really brief ones, if you would, Mark and Philippe, and then I want to ask you all to identify the next steps.
Yeah, for me, the question is not necessarily what you monitor, but it's all about the lifespan. So the life cycle of from TRL 0 to deployment, and it maybe is also decommission. And we have to be honest, we are not doing many things wrong, because standardization, safety regulation, mandatory things. So in theory, all this is very nice, but we have not been able to reduce the life cycle from, let's say, 15 years, from day one to the full deployment, and then potentially the benefit of it. And that is something we might wish to also think in research terms, to look if the new technology is as faster as everybody thinks, because it's something which renews itself. So could we benefit from what we think are shorter life cycles from this new technology?
Okay, Philippe.
Yeah, no, just very quickly on the monitoring. I think we have built up a lot of experience in the recent years with the common projects, with the SESAR deployment manager that has built up a know-how on how to program, develop. Well, there is the deployment program to begin with, but also to be involved all the time with the stakeholders, collecting information, what's happening, and the transparency and the peer pressure. It goes a very long way to stimulating deployment with what is in the end a non-coercive method. We've learned that going after member states for the non-execution of a certain rule is not very effective, because to begin with, the people we send this to, and we send them to court for something that a organization 5 steps down has not done. And then it takes years before this. What really works very well is this constant monitoring, being on people's backs, being transparent about what's happening and what's not happening.
Okay.
So I think we need to integrate that and build that further in the future, also connected with the infrastructure manager function that we put in the SES regulation, and use that good experience going forward.
Okay, we have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to have to ask you to do this in half a minute each instead of a minute. But Philippe said at the beginning, a plan is just a plan. We now need to roll up our sleeves and implement it. So as you all roll up your sleeves with your respective hats on, and it can be a key next step for you and your organisation, the area you focus on, or it can be for someone else, any other actor, any other stakeholder in this chain. But for each of you, the key next step, if we are to ensure the successful rollout of this master plan that you've all agreed is so absolutely essential for the future of this sector. Mark.
Train sufficient staff to handle the current traffic, but also the technological transition which is needed. And I mentioned that last year, go green. We haven't talked about that, but we should not forget that as a system, we have a responsibility to actually translate the green agenda into tangible.
We talked about that this morning. We did, rest assured, we did talk about it at the first panel. Maria Grazia.
For me, it's to ensure the buy-in of industry, and this can happen only if you have a partnership, industrial partnership or a PPP, where there is enough trust in the vehicle to allow the buy-in to deployment.
Thank you. Michael.
So for Eurocay, implement a technical work program as planned and identify potential gaps.
Yes, we have 2 dimensions. We've spoken a lot about the regulatory side, where we, as I said, to a large extent are in your hands in terms of prioritization. So I believe that can work out. On the other hand, we also competent authority, and that's where there is more cause for concern, because we have some unresolved problems of staffing, basically. We need a double-digit number of people to do the design and production approvals and product certifications in ATM. And even though we may have the income, because we are funded by fees and charges, we cannot employ more staff. So we need to come around that hurdle, otherwise we are looking into some delays here.
Thank you very much. Philippe, you have the last word.
Well, I want to make a comparison, if I may, with the automotive sector, where, of course, also in Europe we have been leading for a long time. We have built in Europe the best diesel engines in the world, and we've put all our engineers at work to get another percent and another percent of efficiency, while some others were going all electric. And so maybe we should take a lesson from that and realize, add a bit to what Mark was saying about sectorization, making sectors ever smaller. There comes a point when you cannot go further. in the way that the way of working that you did in the past. So we should really make a big choice for that new service delivery model, data-based, AI-based, cloud-based, interoperable. I see that the manufacturing sector and a number of ANSPs and many controllers themselves are in favor of that. So I would say, let's do it and let us know, let SESAR know, and let the Commission know what help you need from us on that journey, and we will try to provide it and put it in the context of the new priorities of this next Commission: competitiveness, industrial leadership, resilience, defense, etc.
Thank you very much. Will you join me in thanking our panel for a terrific discussion? Thank you all very much.